Hello boys and girls, my name is Danny Mack and I'm a stylized 3D character artist and content creator on YouTube. Now I've spent the last 7 years or so researching and developing new tools and techniques for creating stylized characters, and for the last 5 years I've been sharing most of this knowledge on my YouTube channel, which is currently approaching 200,000 subscribers. Now I am honoured to have been asked to be one of the judges for the 3D creation category in this year's MSI Creator Awards, and I am very excited to see what awesome content you guys can come up with. Now, you're probably aware by now that the theme for this year's awards is technology meets aesthetics, which kind of reminds me of an ongoing conversation I have with my dad. Now, my dad, who is and pretty much always has been a software developer, who I'm pretty sure thinks in numbers, has this idea in his head that technology should be all about function. Now, technology is there to do a job and it either works or it doesn't, so says he. And if it doesn't work, then nobody's going to use it regardless of what it looks like, so what it looks like is irrelevant. When I told him I bought a German car, he gave me a nod of approval. German cars just work, don't they? But when I said I intended to modify it to make it look nicer, that quickly turned into a scoff. Now, to be fair, he has a point. If technology doesn't work, then nobody is going to use it. But the problem with this is that it neglects user experience. Sorry, I just want to check that it's going, yeah. The problem with this is that it neglects user experience because the way we interact with technology is important. Now, while my dad could happily navigate a computer using command line all day, I think we can all agree that he's in the minority, right? Now, something can work perfectly, but if it doesn't look and feel right, then nobody's going to use it. And the example that springs to my mind is Windows 8. Now, when Windows 8 came out, it came out with better performance, better security, and just overall improvements on the back end. But everybody hated it because it didn't look right. It didn't look how people wanted it to, and as a result, people didn't know how to use it. And you know, I think people, generally speaking, we're drawn towards things that are aesthetically pleasing. So if the car from In-Betweeners, say, which is a popular show here in the UK, by the way, if this car had the same performance and price point as a, I don't know, Lamborghini, I think it's obvious which would sell more. Now, having said that, I do think that there's a danger of over-emphasising aesthetics at the sacrifice of functionality, and anybody that's walked home barefoot after a night out because their high heels are killing them will instinctively understand this. Not that I've ever walked home barefoot myself. I just leave my heels on and endure the pain. But that's not the point. The point is that I believe that both function and form hold a place in, well, many aspects of life, not just technology. But it's important to find the right balance. Now, the way I would recommend you interpret this theme, technology meets aesthetics, is to think about where your skill set is first. Now, what I mean by that is when I hear technology meets aesthetics, for whatever reason, I start thinking about really futuristic concept cars with crazy technology, which always seem to be way more aesthetically pleasing than the cars we see driving down the street. Now, if creating 3D cars is your thing, then maybe this is an idea you might want to pursue, but as a character artist, I have absolutely zero experience in this area, so obviously I would try to interpret the theme from a character design angle instead. Now, normally, I would advise students not to come up with their own designs because, you know, in production you would have a guy or girl who does all the drawings and designing, and a separate guy to translate those designs into 3D. Now, while there is some overlap of skills between these two roles, they largely require different skill sets. So if you're not already strong at character design, you're better off asking someone that is if you can work from one of their designs. Otherwise, your 3D model is bound to suffer. Now, having said that, you don't always have the luxury of being part of a full team of specialists, such as in a smaller indie studio, or specifically in this case, a contest where usually all of the work has to be your own. So when MSI contacted me and asked me to sort of get involved in this and create a piece, I asked them, does it have to be does it have to relate to the theme? And they said yes, and I thought, oh dear, I'm gonna have to actually do some work now. But I'm glad it worked out this way, because it did lead me to some interesting ideas regarding the golden ratio, which is something we're going to talk about shortly. So the piece I came up with, which I've called Your Wife Has Been Delivered, Tell Us How We Did. And I'm going to give you an overview of the process during this video. But the way I came about this idea, well, first of all, I wanted to figure out a way I could incorporate my skills as a character artist into the theme. Technology meets aesthetics. And I immediately thought of Blade Runner 2049. Now, for those that haven't seen it, our protagonist essentially has a virtual holographic girlfriend. Now, I think it's pretty self-explanatory how this fits into the theme, because you have your technology and you have your aesthetics. And as a character artist that creates predominantly female characters, I sometimes get labelled wife maker. Not a label I'm particularly thrilled about, if I'm being honest, but it did seem like potentially a route I could go down. So the next thing I did was start looking into human aesthetics and came across a whole industry dedicated to beauty and aesthetics, which is something I peripherally knew existed, but I never really properly looked into it. And when I did, I noticed something really interesting. Now, one of the issues character artists often have to contend with is something known as the uncanny valley, which is essentially where a character looks almost lifelike, but something is a bit off, and the result tends to look unnatural and a little bit creepy somehow. Now, this issue seems to arise with things like perfectly symmetrical faces and completely flawless skin. So what's interesting is that these are in direct conflict with the human aesthetics companies that promote highly symmetrical faces and flawless skin. It's almost like digital humans are trying to look more real and real humans are trying to look more digital. So I thought I would play on this idea and take it as an opportunity to break the rules of 3D character art and actually try to create a piece that sits somewhere in the uncanny valley. The message being that if Blade Runner is an example of what we can expect from the future and romantic partners are something that can be designed to be beautiful, then there's something I think is a bit inherently unnatural and maybe a bit creepy about that. So before we move on to how I went about creating that, I want to discuss another interesting idea pertaining to beauty and appeal, which is the idea of the golden ratio. If you've never heard of the golden ratio, I'll do my best to explain, and we're going to get a bit mathematical for a moment, but bear with me because this can apply to your artwork. At school, you probably learned about the number pi, which is 3.14159265359 and so on. I know that wasn't a low-key flex, I am actually reading that from my screen. Well, the golden ratio is similar, but this number is known as phi, or sometimes phi, which when rounded up is 1.618. And the way we come up with this number is using what's known as the Fibonacci sequence, which goes like this. So starting from 0 and 1, we add these numbers together to get 1. Now we add the result of the last number in the sum, which is also 1, to get 2. Same thing again, we take the result, which is 2, and we add it to the last number in the sum, which is 1, to give us 3. Do this again, we get 5, then 8, and so on. Now the higher up this sequence we get, the closer we get to the golden ratio of phi, which we can check by dividing one result by the previous. So 377 divided by 233 equals 1.618. But of course, we're artists, we don't tend to deal with numbers too much, so let's see how we can visualize this ratio. If we draw a line and split the line in half, we have a 1:1 ratio. The side of this length is 1 and the side of this length is 1, so they're both the same. However, we can split the line a bit off centre like this, and using the wonders of modern technology we can easily get this to precisely a ratio of 1 to 1.618. And this line will become more important later, but for now let's see what happens if we rotate the short side 90 degrees and turn this into a rectangle. Now we'll divide this rectangle by the golden ratio and we get a new rectangle with the same ratio. And I can divide this by the golden ratio again and again and keep dividing to infinity. And from these points of intersection rises what's known as the golden spiral, which you might have seen before. Anyway, I think that's enough theory because you're probably wondering what any of this has to do with art. Well, when you're creating artworks, and it really doesn't matter what kind of art you create, whether it's characters or landscapes or cars or architecture or anything really, your best source of reference is usually going to be nature. And what can be found in abundance in nature? This golden ratio. You can find it in plants, bugs, snails, fruit, the weather, waves, planets, and even galaxies. Now this isn't a new idea, and in fact artists and designers have been implementing ideas of the golden ratio for centuries, such as the pyramids, the Parthenon, the Eiffel Tower, Notre Dame, the Statue of Liberty. And in artworks such as the Mona Lisa, the Last Supper, the creation of Adam, and many more. Now, the place this ratio crops up that's most interesting to me as a character artist though is the human body. So if you look at someone's arm, right, it's a bit blurry, you can't really see the whole thing, but just imagine you can for now. If you took someone's arm and drew a line from the shoulder to the fingertips, like that, okay, you're going to find that the elbow intersects this line, creating a ratio of 1 to 1.618. Now if you draw a line from the elbow, can you see that? Yeah, to the fingertips, you'll find that the wrist then intersects the line, again creating a ratio of 1 to 1.618. Now let's draw a line from the wrist to the fingertips. I think you know what's coming. The base of the fingertips, you get a ratio of 1 to 1.618. Now guess what happens if we draw a line from the base of the fingers to the fingertips? We get 1 to 1.618. It's pretty crazy, right? And it's not just the arm where this shows up, it's all over the body, including the face. Now, this person is called Florence and was labelled Britain's most beautiful face in 2012. And what's interesting about it is the golden ratio can be found all over her face. And to demonstrate this, I'm going to use a tool called Phi Matrix, which basically lets me overlay this ratio on my screen. So I'll line this up with the eyes and I'll set where I want the intersection to be. Now let's scale this to the point it meets the bottom of the nose. And notice the golden ratio section sits neatly right at the top of the nostrils. Now if we move this down to the bottom of the lips, you'll see that the intersection now sits at the bottom of the nose. Let's carry on down to the bottom of the chin, and again, intersection right in between the lips. Now let's bring the top of this line down to the top of the nostrils and see the intersection sits at the bottom of the lips. If we reverse this ratio, you'll also see the intersection at the top of the lips. Let's pull this down and look at how the mouth sits neatly within this ratio. Even the lips themselves fall gracefully in this ratio. Now, all over this face you'll find this ratio, and there's a video on YouTube that shows them all. I think there's about 25 points on this face where the ratio lines up perfectly, which suggests, it doesn't equate to, but reasonably suggests that the more we incorporate these proportions into our faces, the more aesthetically pleasing they might be. Now, I'm sure some of you are thinking that this is just coincidence, and if I'm being honest, before I started this project, I did too. You know, I was always of the opinion that creating an appealing face is something that you have to feel. It's something you get from intuition, which grows from years of practicing and experience. But then it occurred to me that what if, when we're practicing faces and gradually improving our tuition to make them more appealing, maybe we are just gravitating towards shapes that fit these proportions? It's just a thought. But then I thought, well, how does that work with stylized characters? Because a big part of stylizing characters is, of course, pushing proportions around. And actually, this question is why I've never really taken the golden ratio too seriously before. Because for a long time, I've known about the golden ratio face mask, which supposedly suggest ideal proportions for beautiful faces. But of course, you can't apply this to a Disney character. So, when I started this project, I decided to look and see if anyone is using the golden ratio to design stylized characters. And I quickly found that character designer Steven Silver uses the golden ratio, and in fact used it to help him design his most popular character, who I'm sure you're aware of, Kim Possible. And while of course you won't find the same markers as found on a real human face, in a video on YouTube Steven explains how he used it to find other proportions, such as the hair in relation to the face, the shirt in relation to the waist, and also from the shoulder to the wrist to get the intersection of the shirt here. He also demonstrates how this proportion was used in the design of Fred Flintstone. So when I saw this, it dawned on me that this ratio can absolutely be used with stylized characters. Now, I didn't manage to find a case where people were applying this idea to stylized faces, so I decided to take the leap myself and just start measuring things, and I'll show you how I went about doing that next. But first, let's talk about the hardware that I used for this project. To create this piece, MSI sent me their latest laptop, the Creator Z16, or as I'm sure many of you will be calling it, the Z16. Now, the item I was sent is actually a prototype because I believe the final product has yet to be released, and as such there's certain elements I'm not allowed to show you, but what I can say is this thing is a little beast. It has an 11th gen Intel i7 processor, along with an NVIDIA RTX 3060 graphics card. So this thing handles Blender and Photoshop, no drama at all. The casing is a CNC unibody chassis, which is a clever way of saying this thing is solid and beautiful. It features a 90 watt-hour battery, as well as top-of-the-line features such as a PCI Express Gen 4, Thunderbolt 4 ports, a mini LED backlit keyboard, and Wi-Fi 6E. But the thing I've been holding off on is the 15.5-inch 2560 by 1600 touchscreen screen. And the touchscreen is awesome, by the way. It's like having a tablet and a laptop at once. Now, if you're very observant, you'll have noticed that I said the screen was 2560 by 1600, which isn't your typical 16 by 9 ratio, but instead a 16 by 10, which, by the way, in screen terms is pretty much the golden ratio. And this gives you a bunch more vertical space on your screen, which was surprisingly noticeable actually. Now, what I love about this laptop though is how powerful it is. Now, us 3D guys are bound to working from desks because most laptops just can't handle 3D software, but this thing is great. Now, of course, I have ended up working from my desk anyway because everything in the UK is still locked down, but I'm looking forward to showing this thing off in the coffee shops in summer. Fingers crossed anyway. So now I'm going to go over my process for creating a 3D illustration, and I'm sure you're aware that such a task would take far too much time to fit into this relatively short video. So what I thought I'd do is give you an overview of the workflow involved, and then you can dig into each section into more detail yourself. So listen out for keywords that you might want to search later. Now, I've got a couple of videos online about my workflow already, but this one is going to be a bit different. Now, rather than show you my process for creating a personal piece, where time really isn't really an issue, I thought I'd show you my process for creating a piece where time is an issue. And the reason for that is that this project really was a race against time for me. And I've never really addressed the differences with how I approach the challenges that come with this. 3D work takes much longer than 2D, but there's a few tricks to getting things done quicker. So again, obviously there's only so much depth I can go into with this, but I have plenty more specific tutorials on my YouTube channel if you're interested. Anyway, the software I used for this project was ZBrush, Blender and Photoshop, and for the most part in that order. That is, I started with ZBrush for most of the modelling and sculpting, moved over to Blender mainly for the surfacing and rendering, and finally brought the image into Photoshop for post-processing. Though I should say it's not quite as simple as 1, 2, 3, as there's always a bit of backwards and forwards involved, as you'll see. Now, a question I always get asked, and I mean always, is why do I even bother with ZBrush when Blender is capable of sculpting itself? So let me answer that question now. Well, the first reason is that I've been using ZBrush for 7 years now, so I'm very accustomed to it. Also, I own a license and updates have always been free for ZBrush, so Blender would really have to offer something special for me to make the leap. Now, I love Blender and I think it's an amazing tool, but ZBrush is dedicated to the field of sculpting, and each new release contains new and improved tools for the purpose of sculpting. Blender is more of an all-purpose tool, so it's not dedicated to just sculpting, since it can basically tackle the entire pipeline in some form or another. And this is great, but it does mean that Blender is going to struggle competing in a sculpting race against ZBrush, let alone get far ahead enough to make me consider moving over. So that's essentially why you're starting ZBrush. Now, having said that, I have actually jumped the gun a little bit here, because where I actually start is by gathering references. Now, we're going to jump over to the computer now to continue the rest of this stream. So normally, I'm working from a 2D reference, right? That let me just center that on the screen. I'm working from a 2D reference that I've asked a 2D artist that I can work from, as I mentioned earlier. But even when I'm not, and with every piece I do, I always work with anatomy references, and I think I've got some up here. Let me just check. There's nothing non-broadcastable. Let me just move a couple of things around. Okay, I think we're safe. The reason is that obviously with anatomy references, you don't always have stuff that can go onto YouTube, but this is essentially what I'm looking at with every single piece I do. Even with stylized stuff, you want to be relying on human anatomy, so that's something worth bearing in mind. Now, this app that I'm using is called PureRef, which is it's a free app for referencing. It's like a referencing tool. Let me just get the website. So you want to go to pureref.com, and I would highly recommend this because it's really nice. It lets you sort of resize your reference images, do all sorts of fun stuff with them. And it's just somewhere to keep them all, and it's just a nice tool, very popular, and it's free as well. Although I think there's an option to support them. So do that. Do support them if you can. So once you've got all your references, please don't crash them with ZBrush. Not now. It's been taking a long time to save recently. I'm not quite sure why. It does this sometimes. 41 seconds to save. That's not good, is it? I'll have to look into that. Now, as I say, I normally work from a 2D artist reference, but in this case, because I was feeling really pushed for time, I decided to start straight in 3D. Now, this isn't something I would recommend doing. I was pretty desperate, but usually, and I actually confirmed this to be true with this project, usually when you don't use a 2D reference and you start directly in 3D, it's a false economy, right? Because you end up just going round in circles a little bit. So I'm not actually sure why I did that, but that's it. We got there in the end, at least. Now, to save a bit of time, see, usually I'll always start sculpting from a sphere. The reason I do this is because I feel like it gives me a lot of practice. I like the sort of the challenge of creating something from nothing, basically, and I like the practice of creating a head from just a sphere, basically, which I feel like I don't get as much from using a base mesh. Now, when I'm time constrained, like I was this time, base meshes are great because obviously you save a lot of time, especially if your base mesh has clean topology like this one does. Let me just insert it if I can find it. Wherever. Okay, so this is the base mesh I used. It's basically a model from a previous project, and it's got nice topology. Now, the problem with having nice topology like this, let me just make this a bit more PG. The problem you can sometimes have with having decent topology like this is if you want to make big changes, which you may well do, you can end up with like the topology doesn't support the changes that you want to make, if that makes sense. It would be really nice if we could use Dynamesh instead, which, well, let me just turn up the resolution. Flipping heck. Not quite sure why it's doing that. That's strange. Not quite sure why it's doing that. Let's just come over to the final project so that I can show you this. This is what we ended up with. If I were to Dynamesh this, please work for me. Okay, that's better. I will turn the resolution up a little bit though. So now, with this, like, you've got obviously this really small topology that you can work on. Where's my pen gone? There it is. And if you're familiar with Dynamesh, you know why this is a good thing. But the problem with doing that is that we've just lost all of that good topology, which might have been usable for the rest of the body, just to fix, I don't know, like one small section on the eye. But there's a way around this. So if you find yourself in this situation, what you can do is duplicate this mesh, Dynamesh this. Okay, let me just find it. Where are we? Where's Dynamesh gone? There it is. So Dynamesh this like that, then work along as you would normally. Now what you've got is the original mesh, which is good topology, which you can then go and project. So I'll just make a big change just to demonstrate this. Let's say she had, I don't know, a massive crease there for whatever reason, just for example's sake. And re-Dynamesh that. Let me just make this screen bigger as well. You don't want to be retopologizing the whole thing from this. So instead what you can do is get your old topology, click this project all, make sure that's visible, and then it'll conform to the mesh underneath. Now we have got some problems around here, which you can solve by masking certain areas off, like this. And then, so the problem is the topology over here might not be suitable. That was kind of the point I was trying to make, whereas the rest of the topology is. But what you can now do is take this into an app such as Blender or 3D Coat and just retopologize this section. I hope that makes sense. So as I'm sculpting along, let's undo out of all this. I'll get to a point, not usually this point. Let's just bring some of this stuff back. I don't want all of it. Okay, so maybe something like, we'll get rid of the hair because that's the part I'm going to show you. Hide you. These are previous experiments gone wrong. Right, so what I'm going to show you is how I approach doing the hair, and I actually usually use a combination of ZBrush and Blender for this because they both have their own strengths and weaknesses. So the way I would approach the hair, the face isn't usually this this sort of progress this much. This is the final thing, as I was saying. In fact, let's go back to our old one so that this makes a bit more sense. Let's just imagine she's got some eyes. So the way I would approach the hair is, first I would create a mask. I would mask out where I want the hair to grow from in ZBrush, like this. And then what I'm going to do is extract. I can't quite remember where it is because I use a custom menu, you see. But if you hold control over a button, you can see down here. I can't actually show you without moving my cursor, but at the bottom of here you can see where it lives. Tool, subtool, extract. So if I go to tool, subtool, and it should be in here. So there it is. Okay, so I'll extract that. Click accept. Now what I can do is just, so I know that I wanted this character to have a hair in a bun, okay? And again, that's another thing that I did to sort of save on time, is make sure she had quite a simple hairstyle. So if everything's tied around the back and you can't see it, that just makes things a bit quicker. So the design, even the design of the hair had the time constraint in mind. Now what I would do is just sort of indicate a bit of directionality with this. So the bun's going to be down here somewhere. So I'll just sort of indicate the directionality of the hair, but none of this is actually going to be visible in the final thing. This is actually just me paving a roadmap for when I'm in Blender in a moment. Okay, so let's say that's something. Now, one of the reasons why I wanted to show you this, and let me just turn that off and open up a fresh instance of Blender. Now, one of the reasons I wanted to show you this is to get my objects to Blender. There's a massively time-saving tool that you can use, and it's called GoB. If you've never heard of GoB, I would highly recommend researching this. Let me, hang on. So there's our PRF. Let me just type in GoB, because this is a third-party plugin, but it is my favourite plugin of all time. I think it is the most time-saving thing most time-saving plugin I've ever come across for ZBrush and Blender users. So you want to go to this web address up here, github.com josecanseco/gob. Get that installed. Do get that installed, because watch what happens. So with my fresh instance of Blender, click on, make sure import's selected, and it's having a little save and it's going to take a while, which is a shame. But essentially what this is going to do is send all of my objects and materials straight to Blender. There's no exporting, there's no like messing around with all your export options. It's all taken care of in the code written by Jose Canseco. So grateful to him for that. So all I'm going to do is click Gozi. I'll click all so it sends all of these meshes. And like that, before I've even opened it, it's there. How nice is that? And there's a bunch of different options that you can change in the settings. There's all these different options for importing and exporting. Really useful too. Highly recommend. Saves you so much time. Anyway, let's get on to making this hair then. So first I'll show you how I would create hair from scratch, and I have got a tutorial on how to do this in more depth, but then I'll show you the super quick way of doing it, which is the way I did it for this project. So first I'm going to add a path curve, so I'll do Shift A, go to curve, add a path curve. This is going to represent our strand. Oh, she's really small for some reason. Let's just scale that up. Okay, so this is going to be our hair strand. Now we'll add in a curve circle, and this is going to represent the cross section of that strand. And the way we do that is, if I select this curve, come over to the object data properties, and then come down to, where is it, geometry, select object here. I'm just going to select this circle and notice what happens. I'll click fill caps so that the ends are capped off. And now what we can do with this circle is, I will right click, set the handle type to free, and watch what happens when I start moving these around. This is really interesting. I'll look at it from a top view. It affects the shape of our hair strand, which is really useful. So like, I'll normally spend quite a while designing a strand here, so you can actually, I'll select them all, hit subdivide so we get a bunch more, and I usually create something a bit more square, a bit more rectangular, sorry, like this. It'll make a bit more sense in a moment. And you can play with these handles too. Make this look a bit more interesting. You can also add in, let's just do this. Just get loads in there. Add in a bit of a groove into the strand. In fact, let's open another window so you can see what I'm doing when I'm doing this. So this is what's happening when I'm moving these around. We're sort of designing our hair strand, which is cool. However, this can be a bit tedious and a bit time consuming, which is why I'm going to show you the super quick way later in a moment. Although it does it does involve actually going through and doing this process in the first place anyway, but you'll see what I mean. So let's say we have something like that. Now what I'll do is start laying this hair strand on the head. Turn that round. Like so. Right now it's twisted. Oh, it's just twisted itself back. But you can actually twist the whole thing, select all the points using, what did I press then? A. Control T will just twist the whole thing, but you can actually twist individual points as well, which is really cool. You can also scale using Alt S, so you can add like a nice taper to the strands, which is what hair tends to do. But my favourite thing about this, this is awesome, I really love this, is you can dynamically change the poly count of this hair strand. So if I turn on wireframe, just so you can see this, you see how high poly that is? That just won't do. If you come over here, you can see resolution U. In fact, let me just create a second hair strand. Just to demonstrate this. If I turn this down, you can see how the topology automatically reduces. The topology crossing the strand just reduces. That is really nice. And if we come over to here, so it's reduced the topology crossing, but the topology going down the strand is still really high. But if we select this and do the same thing, and it's going to affect every strand that is referencing this shape. And you can see if I turn this down, just like that, this is really useful. Right, so now I promised to show you a quicker way of doing this. But as I say, it does require you having done this before, because all I'm going to do is copy and paste a hair strand from a previous project. So let me open up a previous project where I use these strands. It's just loading up on my other screen for some reason. It's just taking a moment. There we go. Okay, so this is a project I've been working on. I've nearly finished it. But I've used these strands, and I don't know if you saw that, it's still loading. But I've got three different shapes here. That just adds a bit of variation to your strands. This one that's super flat are for the like really small flyaway hairs. You can see here. The reason why I keep it super flat is because there's no point having detail and increasing the poly count when that detail can't be seen. Anyway, let me just get her back into a T-pose. Or an A pose, sorry. Oh, not everything's... do you know what? It doesn't matter. So if I just select this strand and hit Control C for copy, then I come back to my project. Let's just delete all this stuff. If I press Control V, so we've got our hair strand there, and we've also got our shape too. Wait, and look how quick that was. Like, so it's just automatically set up. We have a bit of a scale difference, but you can easily scale that up. Scale that up. Set the origin to the geometry. Nice. So much faster. So yeah, that's exactly what I did. I actually pulled it from that model you just saw as well for the final thing. Much quicker than doing it from scratch. And what's the next thing I wanted to show you? Oh, so okay. So right now, so I do want to send this back to ZBrush because I do want to poly paint these strands, but at the minute they're in a form ZBrush can't read because. Hang on, let's just lay this properly. At the minute they're in a format ZBrush can't read because they're still curves. So what you need to do is convert these curves back into geometry. Let's just get this reasonably in place. Which you can do right inside Blender. Very easily, actually. Oops. Ah! This wasn't the plan. That'll do. You might want to spend a bit longer laying it. By the way, laying the hair strands does tend to take quite a bit of time. I haven't found a quicker way of sort of getting them laid down onto the head. But the results are usually worth it. If you take a bit of time to get it looking nice, the results tend to be worth it. Anyway, let's just say we have a full head of these hairs. And we wanted to send this to ZBrush. Now this wouldn't work, as I said, because it's a curve. But all we need to do is press F3, convert to, click this convert to, and just click convert to mesh. And now it's no longer a curve. Now be wary doing this because you do lose your curve controls. However, what you do get, so this is back in ZBrush. Oh yeah, of course we scaled the object. But what you do get now is, well, first of all, I can now paint it with polypaint, which is what I want to do. But I can also tweak the result with my sculpting tools in ZBrush, or if you prefer to sculpt in Blender, which is nice. So it's a nice way of sort of utilizing the powerful yet tricky nature of curves. Well, as I say, very powerful, and then later using I mean, sculpting tools are powerful, but you lose a lot of control over things like twisting and tapering and all that sort of stuff. Anyway, and yeah, now we can start painting on it. Oh, and notice that notice how easy it was to send that back, by the way, using the Gobi plugin. I just clicked the export button and straight back in. I mean, it came back in big, but that's because we've got some scaling issues, which I wouldn't have if I was doing a proper project, because I would make sure everything's scaled properly, and very much probably should have done before I started started this stream, but never mind, you get the idea anyway. So now, I've created my hair. The face doesn't actually look like this, or it didn't. Let's just go with that one. We'll hide those flowers for now as well. Oh, that was a different bunch. We'll hide those eyelashes too. I'll talk about those later though. Like the ones. Okay. Actually, let's get cool. Right, so at this point, when I've got some hair in place, so I don't finish the face and then do the hair. I sort of get the face to, in fact, I'll tell you where I got the face to, because I actually saved a screenshot. It was, where are we? There we are. So it was something like this. Okay, now bear in mind I'm not working from a 2D drawing as well. So when I saved the screenshot, I was actually quite happy with it. I thought it was looking all right. But again, I'm not working from a 2D concept, so I've no goal as such. And this is when I pulled out the Phi Matrix tool, which is the golden ratio that I was talking about earlier. And what I did, bearing in mind that I've already actually used it for this, but what I did here when I had this face is I just started measuring stuff. Oh, I wish it wouldn't do this. Well, I can still move this around while this is going. And what I found was that stuff actually did sort of line up in some places, and that looked nice. So coming from the side of the head, I had something like this where the pupils just nicely lined up into this ratio. A lot more stuff is going to line up here because I've already been through and done this. But you can see, hang on, in fact, we can do it straight on here. So yeah, the pupil from the side of the head, that just naturally lined up, and then this here. But then there was quite a few things that didn't line up that I felt, oh, well, what would happen if it did? So like maybe we could get the corners of the eyes to meet this ratio here, or oh, there's another one. Maybe we could get the corners of the nose to meet it there. Just lots of little things like that. And so what I did was I just started pushing things around. Now, as I mentioned earlier, it's always a good idea to do stuff in 2D first, and I wish I had with this, because what I was finding was when I was pushing stuff around in 3D, so I'd be looking at it from the front like this in an orthographic view, just so that we could be consistent with this. I'd find something and be like, okay, so what if you can see how the edge of the nostril sits on that line from here. That's one of the tweaks I did. But anyway, as I'm moving around, I'm like, so what if I move this over to meet that line, or I move this over to meet that? The problem with doing this in 3D is that you're messing things up from different views. So, you know, if you were doing this in 2D, you wouldn't have that issue. So as I say, get this stuff done in 2D first, which is what I'm going to do in future projects. I'm definitely going to give this another try. But anyway, as I say, I'm moving stuff around, and things starting to look ugly. And I did briefly start losing faith in this process, bearing in mind this isn't a process I've ever done before. But I've also been doing 3D for long enough to know that you need to have faith in the process. Like, your sculpts are going to look ugly, even if you're working from a reference. At some point, your sculpt is going to look ugly, and this is something you want to be wary of, and be aware of, and not get too freaked out by, because it happens to everyone at some point. Just make sure you fight through the pain. Anyway, so yeah, that's kind of how I came up with the design. So I didn't draw anything first. I just went around with this tool and tried to find as many golden ratio points as I could, and I thought the result was quite nice. Not with that massive gouge in the eye, but yeah, I was quite happy with it, considering I'm not a character designer. I thought the result was pretty decent. I'll just keep this PG. So once I'd got to something that I thought looked nice, this is the point. I'd been working on that for a while, going backwards and forwards. And if you find yourself in this situation, it's always a good idea to move on to something else, because you start becoming blind to your mistakes. So I thought, let's do another part of this sculpt. And the next thing I moved on to was the flowers. Now, there's no way I could have modelled these flowers from scratch in time. There was just no way. If you saw them. Fortunately, I had these flowers from a previous project. And this is another thing I wanted to talk about when it comes to cutting down on time in 3D, is have an asset folder. Every time you finish a project, you want to be saving out each asset that you create or download from the internet or buy, whatever, and just have them there ready for when you need them. Fortunately, I had this ready from another project that I've done, so it was just a case of importing them, and that's it. Save your models out. But of course this didn't give me enough of a rest from the face because it was so quick. So then I moved on to the clothing, and the way I did this, so I knew that I wanted to keep it really simple. Again, the simplicity was in the design from the start, because of time constraints, and all it really is. Also notice that the final thing is cropped from above, just above the elbow, so you can't actually see that her arms aren't bent holding these flowers. Another time-saving thing that I thought up. Anyway, where are we? The clothing. Yeah. All I did for this, and I did end up retopologizing it, because if you look at the final, I'll just open this up so you can see. I did want this texture. I knew I wanted this sort of texture, not this exact texture, but something like this. So I knew I needed decent UVs. So for decent UVs to support this, I needed to retopologize it. The reason I mention that is because if you can get away without retopologizing, then you'll save a lot of time. And I think I probably did with this. Yeah. So this is just a Z-remeshed thing because I didn't need decent topology for this. Anyway, the way I got to these meshes is, well, first of all, I had a full body mesh. I've since deleted that to save on system performance. To improve system performance by saving on poly count. But all I did was mask out where I wanted the clothing to be, like this. And again, just extract it. And I'll just click accept. And you're left with this. Now this is a thick. This has thickness to it, which you can set here. You can actually set this to none, and it won't be thick at all. But I wanted it to sit sort of slightly off the skin. But now with this, what I can do is using Control-Shift-Click with my select rectangle tool, which is BSR. I can just hide the outer layer. Now this looks funny because the normals are facing the wrong way. If I do that, it's now a double-sided face, so you can see what's going on a bit better. If I Control-Shift-Drag so that I'm revealing the outer layer, and then just Tool, Geometry, Delete Hidden, which will be Modify Topology. Delete Hidden. So now I'm just left with this mesh. Super fast, really fast. Now, as I say, I did end up going retopologize this in 3D Coat. I'm not going to do that now. It would take far too long. I did need to sort of pause the arms out a bit so that I could get inside there and then close them back later. But yeah, that's just a really easy way of starting clothing in ZBrush. What did I do next? Okay, so eventually I got to something like this. Okay, and I was poly painting stuff as I was going along. Okay, these colours might look a bit random, but the idea of creating this piece is that it would integrate the sort of theme of this contest, which these colours were in. It makes sense. It doesn't make sense, but just go with it. I didn't have any skin colour though. Let's remove that. I did have a few colours going on. I do like to polypaint my my models as I'm working. This'll be a bit more relevant in a moment. Let's just get rid of all that. So now we want to send this to ZBrush. We want to send this to Blender. Sorry, we're going to use Go B. So if I click visible, it's going to send all the visible models, because obviously I've got a lot of models here that aren't visible. In fact, let's just make sure we've got everything. Send them over. There we are. Look how quick that is. Oh, it's going a bit slow on, is it the eyes? I think the eyes are really high poly. I do actually have a plugin that I've created myself for eyes, which I ended up using for this, the eye designer. I won't start plugging it on this stream though. But yeah, basically another time saving thing is I just imported some ready-made eyes, basically, that I've made in a previous project. Yeah, so it will be these that are, yeah, the super high poly. That's why it took a little while. Now, what I want to do at this point is set up a scene. Again, I'll show you the way of doing this from scratch. It really doesn't take long. And then tell you how I did it for this project. Let's just move that. So the first thing I like to do is, well, I'll go to material preview, which sort of renders it with Eevee, and you can see I didn't actually want it to bring that material. Let me just, where are we? Just get rid of that. Okay, that's better. Now I want to set up a scene so that I can start working in Blender. Let me just shade smooth all this as well. So the first thing I usually do is add an HDRI. So let's open up the shader editor, and I'll change this to world. Now, so I've come over here to the world properties, and then in color under surface, I'm going to add an environment texture. Then I'm going to open up one of the HDRIs that I have on my computer, if I can find it. There we go. Now, with a fresh instance of Blender like this, it's not actually going to affect the model, even though I have material preview selected, because we need to, where is it? Up here. We need to turn on scene world, and you can see now this HDR, which is the Pixar Studios, is affecting our model, and we can confirm this by sort of rotating it around, and you can see the lighting on the model is changing. But I don't like seeing this in the background. I like it to be clean and clear so that I can see what's going on a bit better. I find it a bit distracting, and there's a nice little trick you can do in Blender here to achieve that. So this background node, so the way I got to here, in case you missed that by the way, I opened up my shader editor, I changed this to world, and this is the HDRI that you can see in the background. Now with this, I'm going to duplicate it with Shift D. Then I'm going to, I used a node wrangler shortcut there. Let me do that by hand. So I want a mix shader. Plug each of these in like this. Okay, it looks a bit weird and washed out for now, but bear with me. Then I will search for light path node, and where it says is camera ray, plug that into FAC. Now whatever colour this is down here is the background we're going to get, but the model, importantly, is still lit by the HDR. So you see that? A little bit does bleed through if you put it really high like that, but this is super nice. And now if I turn up this one, that's the HDR. Great. Sweet. I like something like that. Okay. Next I'll add a floor. Now you always want to add a floor. I never used to add a floor. I never saw the point. But I realised that my models weren't being lit as... my models didn't seem to look right, and I couldn't work out what it was. There seems to be something off with the lighting. And and what it was that without a floor you don't get the bounce light which you do in real life, because usually people are stood on floors. Insight of 2021 for you. So all I did was just insert a plane, and I usually add a subsurface modifier to make this sort of circular. So I just use the hotkey Control 4, which adds a subdivision surface with a level of 4 in the viewport, and I'll just apply that with Control A. So you can see it looks like that. So now we've got our HDR, we've got our floor. Now I will add a point light, and it won't actually affect the model until we turn scene lights on. So I'll do that. Add a light. Now, an area light might be better, but a point light's just a bit easier for this demonstration. Put it somewhere above, like this. Now this isn't necessarily the final lighting situation. This is just so that I can work in Blender, like shading and stuff like that. And we'll turn it up a bit, because at the minute it's really dim. Look, it's already looking a lot nicer. Got a few shadows in there. And then I shall add a camera. Now before I do this, I'm going to create a new window, and I'm going to have the camera over here. So if I press T, that's going to hide that menu. And I can even hide the other menus if I want to, but I won't do that for now. Now Shift A, add in a camera. Now I'll press 0 on the numpad to look through the camera. Alt R to remove any rotation, because they always seem to come in at a weird rotation for some reason. Now if I press R90, it'll be exactly 90 degrees, and then I can do this, and I can see that the focal length looks a little bit... Let's just turn this up. I usually work in ZBrush. I usually work with a focal length of 85, I think. Yeah, 85. So to match that, just type in 85 here. I actually usually for like a portrait like this, go a little bit higher, even 95, and then just place that where you want it. Okay. Now, I didn't do this in the project. I didn't need to do this. You know why? Because I've already done it. So, what you could do in this situation, I mean, really, you want to do this without importing any models. Set all that stuff up, save it out, and then you've got it. Put it in your assets folder, then you don't need to do it again. You can just make sure you don't save over it, which I have done many times, because then you have to do it again. And yeah, I mean, it didn't take that long to set up. I mean, I was explaining everything I was doing, and it didn't really take that long. But over the course of, like, I don't know, 10, 20 projects, it's that amount of time builds up. And Blender also saves your UI, so all this faffing around with windows and stuff, that's even more time saved. So yeah, do that. So next, the next thing I like to do, so I mentioned that I'd been doing a bit of poly painting as I was going, but it'd be nice if I could see this in Blender, and actually you can. And the way you do this is, so if I select the hair, because the hair's got poly paint on it. No, poly paint is actually vertex color, so remember that. So if I search for a vertex color node and I plug that into my base color, it pops up. And now I can Control C on this, Control V, and really quickly start adding colours to my meshes. Now, you don't get the most realistic result from this. Like if you're going for something hyper realistic, like this won't really be usable. I mean, you could use it as a way to visualize your colours in the viewport. That's like, it's really nice for that. But I actually just rendered with vertex colors, and the nice thing about this is you don't need UVs. But as I say, if you're going for something really realistic, it's not going to work. It's not going to look right, because the thing with using vertex colors and avoiding adding UVs is that you become restricted in what you can do with that. I'm just okay, this has been going on for a while. I better speed things up a little bit. What was I saying? Yeah, you're a bit restricted. So the example that I was going to give is that the skin, if I was just to add the vertex color, I don't know if this is going to work. Oh yeah, it should do. I can't then paint a roughness map for this, because it's like I can't paint a roughness map on the vertices, because the vertices are already occupied by the color of the skin. Well, that didn't actually work. Which is, oh yeah, no, it won't work because I've removed all the poly paint, didn't I? Well, that's fine. Right. I am gonna have to speed things up a little bit. Where are we up to? Okay, so yeah, so what I ended up doing was UVing this mesh. In fact, let's do this over here. I just want to change that camera to be like that. The way I UV'd the mesh was, you can see these UVs are actually quite neat. I didn't really need to do that because I was only working in 3D really. But do you know what? I can't even remember now, because I've set a hotkey. I mean, this is one way I've sped up my workflow, is I've set the hotkey to mark this as a UV seam to my gaming mouse, which has a lot of different buttons on the side. So I just press. I mean, there's a nice tip that I hadn't actually planned on mentioning. But if you've got a gaming mouse with a bunch of macro buttons, don't think you only have to use that for gaming. You can absolutely use this to speed up your workflow as well. There it is. Oh, so the hotkeys control you. Yeah, so just mark a load of seams on this mesh. I want to do that though. And then I just simply use the auto unwrap, which isn't going to work now because it doesn't have any seams marked. It's just gonna unwrap the whole thing as one. Let's undo out of that, and then just made them neater. But as I said, I didn't actually need to make these neater, because you only really need to make them neater. I mean, bear in mind that this is just for an illustration. This thing isn't going to move. If you're doing it for animation, you might want to spend a bit more time making the UVs a little bit better, but this isn't going to move, and I'm only going to be painting in 3D. So I don't need the 2D mapping to be neat and tidy, because I won't be looking at it anyway. So what did I do next? Sent this back to ZBrush again, using the export button. That comes back with its UVs, and started painting skin on this. Now, bearing in mind that the skin I wanted to be, you know, free from blemishes, like really nice, clean and clear. So this was actually quite easy. I just got the sort of base skin tone. One thing I like to do in ZBrush is make sure wax preview is turned on, and that gives you like this nice sort of subtle fake SSS feel, a subsurface scattering. And yeah, it just looks a bit nicer while you're painting. For skin, you want to make sure you've got a bit of red on the cheeks. So at the minute, look how lifeless that skin looks. I mean, the SSS is helping. Look how lifeless it looks here. Turn that on, it looks a bit better. But as soon as you start adding a bit of red on the cheeks and the nose and the chin and the ears, those ears are a bit wonky, but they get covered up by the hair. You can't really see them, so it's fine. Immediately, it starts to look a bit better. I've kind of overdone it there. But yeah, you get the idea. You want to paint in some lips as well. Oh, I'm actually stood up here. I'm just going to sit down because my back's hurting a bit. Just a sec. Well, I don't know if this is going to work actually. The camera's a bit higher than it used to be. Should be alright, I hope. Hopefully you can see me. Oh, we're fine. That's fine. A little bit in the corner, but we'll be alright. So, once you do have your texture map, let's pretend that I've spent a little bit longer on this and I've got something like this. What you want to do is, under texture map, create new from polypaint. Then you'll clone that under texture, export that, save it out onto your hard drive. And then what you'll do in Blender is bring it in. Bring it in, plug it into your base color, and things are looking nice. Now, I was going to show you painting the roughness map, but I think time is getting on a little bit. The whole point of, or at least one of the points of creating UVs and doing all this is so that you can also have a roughness map. I'll show you what that looks like, at least. So back in ZBrush, I painted this with like a spray color so that it wasn't too uniform. And basically, anywhere that's white is going to appear more shiny, and anywhere that's black or darker is going to appear more matte. So it looks something like this. And that, I should say that that's actually the opposite of a roughness map. White being shiny, black being matte. That's actually more of a glossiness map. So I do invert that and then tweak it before plugging it into the roughness. The reason I do that is because in my mind, white means shiny, black means matte. I guess from back in the painting specular maps days, I don't know. But anyway, so in ZBrush, I showed you the wax preview. That's having a little save, having a little moment. You also want subsurface scattering in Blender for skin, especially. You definitely want it for skin. Now, what subsurface scattering is, so basically when light hits the skin, it penetrates the skin, bounces around a little bit, and then leaves the skin and then hits our eye. And the reason that matters is because it changes how it appears. So what you might want to do then is paint a subsurface scattering texture. I'm just going to take a drink of water. However, this stream is about saving time. So there's actually a little hack you can do, because painting maps can be time consuming, right? there's a little hack that I'm going to show you now that you can actually see it on the screen if you're observant, to not give you, perhaps not the most physically accurate result in the world, but it's certainly passable. So without subsurface scattering, this thing looks like this. It's worth noticing, worth having a look. It looks a bit dead. It doesn't actually look too bad. The roughness map is definitely helping with that, but it definitely looks better with subsurface. But instead of going back into ZBrush and painting a subsurface texture map, what I'm going to do instead, so the first thing I do is plug, let's just get rid of that, my base colour into there. It's worth noting, by the way, that your subsurface texture map is basically telling the renderer how to interpret what's going on underneath the skin in a roundabout way. So obviously it's going to be quite red because what's under the skin is a lot of blood, which is of course red. And I know the reason I tell you that is so that this next part makes sense, because at the minute this is what our subsurface texture looks like, and if I turn this up you can see that it kind of, I mean, it doesn't look too bad. It doesn't look great though. We want this to be quite, this is turned up quite high as well for this model, for it to look like anything. So instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in an RGB curves node and drop that in between this texture and this subsurface color, and we can actually see again what this looks like. The way I'm doing this is by control clicking on this, the way you can see what the texture looks like directly on the model, using a plugin called Node Wrangler. Now I don't have time to explain Node Wrangler. Node Wrangler down. That's another great plugin that you're going to want to get yourself familiar with. Anyway, what I'm going to do with this is, so I've plugged it into the RGB curves node. I'm going to darken it up a bit like that, and already we're getting some red through there, which is nice. This looks a little bit like a subsurface texture. I mean, like I say, it's not completely accurate, but the amount of time you save, a lot of my projects I've just done this, and then I'll bump up the red just to give that a bit more redness, probably make it a little bit darker as well, so something like that. And then maybe I will bump this up a little bit. You can get, if I turn this right up, you can kind of see it starts looking like some sort of candle or something. But like skin is much less, and yeah, it just gives it a lot more life. Right. I think I should probably jump onto compositing now. I just wanted to say something about rendering. Now, I wrote this down. I'm just going to read off my screen if that's okay. So I'm just going to read this off my screen. So apologies for not looking directly at the camera, but I did actually script a whole thing about rendering, which I think is quite important, and I want to get the wording right. So what I said was, now after spending some time moving backwards and forth between ZBrush and Blender and just making sure everything was looking how I wanted it to, it was time to move on to rendering. It's like reading a story, this. Now, okay, this is where I should start from. Now, while you want the final render to look as great as possible, I also think it's worth remembering that this is a precursor to compositing in Photoshop. And what I mean by that is, when a photographer takes a photo, he is going to do his or her best to take the best photo they can. But no matter how successful their shot is, they can always improve it later in Photoshop. Now, rendering is a lot like taking a photograph, except you have so many different settings that you can get lost for hours trying to render out the perfect image, when the thing that you were trying for so long to do could have been done in seconds in Photoshop. Now, I'm mostly referring to things like color correction, but a prime example on this piece was the QR code. I can actually show you the final thing. So I had this QR code in the final piece, and I spent a good half an hour in Blender trying to get this to look like this in Blender, but then I realized, like, this is a still image. This isn't going to move. Like, it's fine to just do it after the fact. So while I would say that it's a bad idea to get into the mindset of thinking, oh, there's a problem with this, but I'll just fix it in post, don't do that. At the same time, you don't want to get into the mindset that everything has to be absolutely perfect before moving to post, because you'll expend way more time than you need to. Try to become familiar with your tools, and while you're creating, be mindful of which tool will do whatever you're trying to do the best. Okay, so that's the reading off the screen done. So you can kind of see the difference between how it came out of Blender and the final thing there. I'm going to talk about that now. So render out your image. Keyword crypto mats and render layers, because you also want to save out masks. What masks will allow you to do is tweak the colors and the look of each object and or material individually, which becomes very important in compositing, and then bring them over to Photoshop. So this is what, let's just get rid of that. This is what it looked like straight out of the renderer. Okay, now that the lack of background I find really distracting, so the first thing I do is add a background. Now what you don't want to do, which is what I used to do, is add a blank layer, get your fill bucket and do this, something like this. Let's make it, because if you want to change this later, it becomes a bit of a pain, like doing, you know, try that, no, try that, try that. So instead what you want to do is add a color fill layer. Let's get rid of that. I'm giving it away before we've even got there. Come down here to what is this? Let's just hover over it. A fill or adjustment layers. You want to add a solid color, and the reason you want to do it that way is because you can see how this looks on the fly, which is pretty cool. Let's bring that one back. I like this background. So the second thing, we've just done the first thing. The second thing I nearly always do, and this makes such a big difference to the look of your image, and usually in a positive way, is add a color balance. Now this is project dependent, but what I will usually do from here is in the shadows, add a bit of blue. Now if I Control Alt click between this adjustment layer and that, it'll only affect what's underneath it, which is kind of what I want now. So the shadows, I'm adding a bit of blue. You can see what that's doing. This is affecting the whole thing. Like I say, if you save out masks, you can just affect certain elements, but I want to affect the whole thing now, because what this is doing is pushing blues into all of the shadows for every object, and that's kind of subtly unionizing the colors a little bit, but we'll do that even more later with a photo filter. So blues in the shadows. In the highlights, I usually add a little bit of red and remove a bit of the blue, or add yellow, like that. So you can see before, after, and look how much vibrant and nice that looks just from a simple little tweak in Photoshop. Really nice. I love this. This is my favorite thing to do. Now do be aware that it does add saturation to your image, so you might want to tone this down depending on your project. The style that I tend to go for is usually quite high in saturation anyway, but I will usually tone this down a bit. Next, what do I do next? Brightness and contrast. Okay, so this is what I did next on this project. Now this is what I do is I add that and then just click auto and see what it gives me. And sometimes I'll realise that the image was actually really dark. I think it's overdone it here a little bit, and I think it quite often overdoes it. But you can just tone that down here if that's what you want to do. And again, if you want to clip that to just the image you're working with, you can flick between it. See before and after. See, that feels too dark though without that. But with that on, that feels better to me, to my eyes, on this screen anyway. I was going to show you how I added the QR code. Yeah, let's do that. So when I first dragged it in, I was like, okay, so I want this to appear like a tattoo. But all that white, it's just not going to work. So what I did was I hit Control I to invert the colours. So where I want it to be black eventually is now white, because what I'm going to do is use this as a mask. Okay. Oops. And then I placed it where I wanted it to be, like so. Now if I Control A, Control C, so I've copied that. If I add in another one of these solid colours and just make it black, then I Alt click into the mask and paste that in, and I want to make sure the rest of this mask is black, like that. Let's just clean up these edges. Okay. Now if I click away from here, that's not exactly what I was expecting. Why has that happened? Oh, finally, we've had something go wrong. Why has that happened? I'm a bit surprised by that. I'm a bit confused by that. I'm not sure why that's happened. Maybe, oh, maybe it's that. Hang on, let me just try rasterize that. Maybe this is what it is. I mean, it worked the first time I did it. Oh, it doesn't want to work now. Oh, that's a shame. I mean, it worked here. This one. I'm not quite sure why that looks a lot different, that actually. I'm not sure why it's not worked here, but basically, where it's white, it shows through. Where it's black, it doesn't. So this is just a black fill layer with a white mask showing through that. And then I set it to a soft light. So this is how it looked right off the bat. Oh, we're all over the place now. I'm glad the problems have occurred near the end, not near the beginning. It would have been difficult doing this whole stream. Flustered. No, I'm not flustered. We're fine. It's all good. So yeah, I just changed this to soft light, and that just gave it more of a... It sort of integrated it with the skin a little bit better. Okay. Maybe I'll tone this down a little bit. Right. Now, the reason why I added this, in fact, what I'm going to do is duplicate this over to here. Oh, it's still behaving strange. Oh, do you know what? No, me neither. I don't know why it's doing that. Okay, we'll just ignore that for now. Oh, hang on. Oh, it's because I've still got that one in it. Oh, is that why it was doing that before? Oh, I'm an idiot. I still had the original one showing through. I bet there's several of you watching this, like screaming at your screen, going, "Don't be stupid." Right. Okay. So. Right. I'm an idiot. So, I am getting flustered now. Come on, let's let's bring it back. So that does work. It did work after all. I just had that showing underneath. Right. Okay, let's get back to where we should be. Okay, yeah, there we are. So the reason why I added this was that I wanted to sell the idea that this character isn't a human, but rather some sort of android or holographic image. However, I didn't feel like this alone really sold that, so that's why I added in the almost Terminator style red dots in the eyes, and hopefully that helped to sell the idea. You can let me know, but I basically just painted these on with my mouse, not even with the with my tablet. I just like that. That's all there was to that. Again, a lot easier to just do straight inside Photoshop. Next, brighten the veil. Okay, so this veil I felt came through a little bit too transparent, like it could do with being beefed up a little bit. It doesn't look white enough, so I saved out a crypto mask of the veil, brought that in. Don't know why it decided to come in completely the wrong place, but hopefully that's helped. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hide that, and I'm going to control click, and you can sort of see that it's select because there's so many holes in this, you can't really see, but it has selected that veil there. Now if I add an adjustment layer, I think I used a brightness and contrast. Let's just go with that. Because I had that selected, you can see that it's already it automatically created a mask for that. So now if I turn up the brightness, you see what happens. Maybe I didn't use a brightness and contrast. What did I use? Let's have a look. I did use brightness and contrast. I don't know why it's not bumping up a bit more. I would have thought it would give a bit more than that. I mean, if I could just duplicate this, automatically duplicate. If you hold Alt while you drag a layer, you'll get this twice, and I could just tweak that if I really wanted to, but it's fine for this demonstration. Next, I added a photo filter layer, and I wanted this. So you've got a bunch of different options here, but I went for a cooling filter. I think I went for the second one, maybe the third one, and turn that down a little bit. The reason why I went for a cooling filter, photo filter, is I want this character to appear cold, not warm and inviting. But the main reason I use a photo filter is to, again, unionize the colors, because what this does is adds a color filter over the whole I'm getting tired now. The whole image, and just adds a bit of blue to everything, so that everything just feels like it's working together a bit better. And then I did reduce I felt like these flowers, so I saved out a mask for the flowers. I can see that veil mask wasn't quite lined up correctly. You can sort of see a little black mark right there, just ignore that. So with the flowers, I desaturated these. So same again, hide it, select it, get an automatic mask, and then yeah, you can just tweak things individually. Really nice. Just desaturate those a little bit, just so they feel like they belong in the scene. There we go. Turn that back up a little bit. And then another thing I like to do is, so if I control shift click on this original layer and then add in a gradient, I'm going to add a sort of grey, dark grey to, hang on, to light grey gradient, with the light being at the top. Oh, let's change that to that. And set this to multiply and turn it down. You can see that the focal point, which is supposed to be the face, is now brighter than the bottom of the image. We can actually duplicate this and set it to overlay, and I will need to turn down the result just to bump this idea a bit more. It just gives it a little bit of a different effect. And eventually, after a bit more tweaking and whatnot, I decided to call it done. Now, to be honest, the hardest part of this entire process were those last 3 words, called it done. Because when I look at this, there's an awful lot I'd like to change about it. Let me just change it to what the final piece actually was. There's an awful lot I'd like to change about it, and had this been a personal piece without any time constraint, I probably would spend hours and hours perfecting this piece. And so the final thing I want to leave you with is set deadlines. Now, even when you're working on a personal piece, try to set deadlines and stick to them, because what you'll find happens is you'll work and rework a piece and get it to be absolutely perfect, but in reality you end up hampering your progress as an artist, because the unfortunate truth is that many of these final tweaks go unnoticed. I mean, they stick out like a sore thumb to you, but unless you're working on your masterpiece, my advice would be move on as soon as you can. And if you figure out how to put that piece of advice into practice, please teach me how to do it. Now, if you've managed to stick around this far, thank you. I appreciate it. Sorry I couldn't go into more depth with some of the topics, but you know, if I was to explain everything, this video would go on for days, maybe even weeks. But hopefully you noticed I made sure to drop in a few keywords here and there. So now you can go off and study each of the topics in more depth. And as I say, I tackle a lot of these on my YouTube channel. However, now it's your turn. It's time to get involved in the contest. So head over to msi.com/landing/creator awards. I'm sure there'll be a link underneath or somewhere near this video, and get involved. You have until the end of the day on May the 31st to submit your entry revolving around the theme that I've been talking about, technology meets aesthetics. And I'm excited to see what you come up with. And yeah, I'll see you. I'm looking forward to it. Peace.